Hey guys, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Results Loading podcast hosted by Prosperous AI. I'm your host, Michael Atkin, and kicking off the series today with a very special guest, Alex Smith, co-founder of Fuego UX. Alex, thanks so much for being on today and kicking the series off here as our first ever guest.
Yeah, thanks a ton. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alex, I want to dive in here right away. Can you talk a little bit about what sparked the idea for Fuego and what followed to get things up and running?
Man, I think it started in June of 2020, mid-COVID, but the story starts a long time before that. I met Nate. Nate's the first person I met when I moved into the dorms of the University of Colorado in Boulder in 2006, and we've been friends ever since. And every few years since then on trips, we're always like, hey, we got to start a business. I went to business school for entrepreneurship. That basically instilled in me, I got to give this a shot. And then all the stars kind of aligned. In the summer of COVID, I left a job, and Nate was kind of ready to leave a job. And I knew he had 13 years of human computer interaction experience, and I kind of had led a sales team at a Google partner before that and was just ready to give it a go. So we incorporated the business and did all that fun stuff that I'm sure a lot of other entrepreneurs listening may have done, and then just started prospecting, designing our website, designing our portfolio. And yeah, it's I'd say those first 6 months were terrifying. It's like when you start a business, you're kind of like, you're definitely faking it till you make it, and you have to convince yourself that you believe it too. It's like, are we doing this? Is this real? And then it really is when you get that first client. So I think we got that first client, like we set our runway on our affordable loss at like 6 months, and we got our first client like right at 5 months. Yeah, so that's a little bit about that beginning period, which was exciting and terrifying all at once.
Totally. And I'd like to respond to what you mentioned about your relationship with Nate real quick. How did you initially feel about going into business with a friend of yours? I know, very cliche, don't do business with your friends. I'm in the same position as you. I'm doing business currently with a longtime friend of mine as well, and we're still going as well. Can you speak a little bit to your guys' dynamic and how you've been able to make it work this long?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it was actually one of the biggest. I told them that straight up at the beginning. I'm like, I'd rather have you as a friend than like lose it over some business, right? But I actually think that advice is true. I remember listening to some old bosses who were talking about how they started their business, and originally there were other partners, and then people, like, there's always lawsuits and there's all these like dark ways it can end. I think you just really have to know who that friend is, and where's that trust and communication. I think all the ways that I've seen those business stories fail was a lack of trust, someone stealing money, someone not being transparent about what they're doing, and the communication. And I think the other thing that's very clear with Nate and I, we're complete opposites, right? Like, I'm the extrovert, I'm sales minded, I have like ADD, my attention span is very short. He is very deep work, just crushes design and can mentor the team, and is really that deep thinker. So I think like having those opposite perspectives for us was like, I think thinking back, we wouldn't have had the success we had he gone out and started it individually, or had I. I think like, I actually do think it is a massive risk to start a business with a friend. But I think it works out more often than is taught in business school or whatever.
I think that's terrific insight for those listening who may be thinking about wanting to start a business with who other than the people you hang out with every day. You guys jumble ideas around constantly, whether you're out of town or over a beer or something. Going out and actually executing is a completely different element that doesn't get respected in the surface level conversations that so often get had amongst friends. So for you guys to be in, several years in your endeavor is totally impressive. So thank you for speaking to that. So as a founder building a startup right now myself, I can certainly say I'm no stranger to overcoming obstacles and dealing with those adverse times. Knowing a bit about your background, I have a feeling you're no stranger to it either, obviously. Can you talk about a moment when absolutely nothing was going your guys' way, you felt like giving up, and ultimately how you ended up pushing through that feeling to end up where you are now?
there's a constant, constantly facing adversity, as you said. And it's not one moment that sticks out. It's just the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. I remember from, getting that first client to our peak in 2022, when it was like a rocket ship, right? Like we hired probably like 14 people and just kind of like, onboarded. I think to date, we're at 40 clients total that we've worked with, but, and then it kind of went down in 23, like every other agency I've talked to. And that was a tough period where it's like, hey, why are all these tech layoffs happening? Those are our core clients. And I think it's just a constant roller coaster in entrepreneurship. I think two things I'll leave you with here is like one of our mentors, who I think he sold his agency to Google back in the day, just said, hey, you're starting an agency. It's like getting on a treadmill and putting on level 10 and just never stopping. And that is literally what it feels like. And the other thing to remember is like, I think anytime that there's a low, it kind of like really helps you refocus, think back to the basics, like meet with the other founders and say like, hey, like, do we want to pivot here? Like, do we need to pivot? Do we need to expand service offerings? Do we want to go more niche? It's just those times when you really have to stick to your gut and think about that strategy that you're aligned with. And I think it's a fair question to ask yourself, a couple times a year, is this still what you want to be doing? And thankfully for us, it's the most fun I've ever had. I've learned 10x anything I learned in business school or previous roles.
Drinking from the fire hose, man. If you can't figure out how to do that quick, it's a tough game to get into for sure, because like you said, the whole thing is a marathon, and if you're not sprinting, you're probably not going to make it to any sort of finish line whatsoever. So obviously the mindset that's required in order to continue scrapping and breathing, especially in this entrepreneurial world. I couldn't agree more with you.
One thing there, I think it's not easy though, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. Like there's some dark days and they're really questioning yourself days. And I think one of the good things for me, when we talked about friends starting it, is Nate, the first thing I ever thought was, hey, what if we fail? Like, what if we fail? And I go on LinkedIn and my whole network says, oh, Alex is a loser. He failed at starting a business. And he reminded me that we've been friends for, 18 years now. And he's seen me fail hundreds of times, like, mountain biking, hiking, partying. There's been so many failures. And that like, I think one thing that I've really learned is you can't fail starting a business. That you can fail in the traditional sense, but you'll never fail because you'll have learned so much and it'll have really driven you towards things you're more passionate about or what you want to do or what you don't want to do, right? So I really don't think there's a way to fail if you're an entrepreneur and you gave it your entire effort.
I couldn't agree more. You said something earlier that I just loved, and it's the fact that the dark days during the building phase and during the building phase of creating a startup in the entrepreneurial world are not talked about enough. On LinkedIn, for example, you go on and it's a lot of glorified content.
Yeah.
Oh, I raised 50 million, we just hit 100 million in revenue, what have you. You don't hear enough about the days when things just don't go your way. You have nothing but adversity on your plate. You have nothing but road bumps, and the grit that's required to kind of overcome those situations, it is so commendable, especially as, someone like yourself who's gone through it, been through the ringer. You said you were a month from the end of your runway, and here you are more than a year later, still sitting here talking to me. So I think bringing light to those dark days as well is crucial, and I think needs to be more top of mind for people who are looking to start a business, and be aware that it's not all glory and revenue and raising capital and VC success. That's not the reality. I love the enthusiasm of the kids coming out of college, for example. Let's start a startup. Let's do our own thing, especially with all the hot industries coming to be today. But I think you make a great point. I couldn't agree with you more. What were some of the pivotal decisions or strategies that contributed to your guys' business growth from pre-revenue to where it is now? Like I said, you're still sitting here talking to me today. Obviously, something's going right for you.
I just want to agree completely. Like LinkedIn is just a highlight reel, just like Instagram and all the other stuff. So definitely tune that out. But yeah, no, you're talking about pre-revenue. So it's in the consulting or agency space. I think it's an easier business to start than a product. I think services is easier to start, but potentially harder to scale, right? Like if you create some SaaS application that gets millions of users, that's way harder to do in the agency space. But yeah, pre-revenue, I think it's important to say, like, I think Nate and I both put 5,000 into a bank account, and we're like, hey, this is what we're going to use for, our website, all our advertising, our, sales
Right.
navigator subscription, and all those early days. And then, yeah, it's been revenue positive since then, right? With some definitely variances on year to year basis. But yeah, so I just think that's a difference that's also not talked about a lot in terms of starting a business, is think about that runway, that affordable loss, and what type of models can be. I think there's an interesting thing that Nate and I both thought about initially and talked about before starting businesses. Do we want investors? And he had worked at startups with investors that were very controlling. And for us, it was like, no, we kind of want to do this so we have to answer to ourselves, and like we trust each other in terms of the strategy and vision we want to follow. And that has been UX design. I think it was very intentional and niche, that need we saw during COVID, and we see continuing to this day, of just terribly designed software, right? That just frustrates
Yeah.
us, right? So I don't think
Yeah.
that need's ever going to go away. I think along the way, it's like, hey, should we do development? Hey, should we do, research? And I think those questions got answered in two different ways. Was, no, we don't want to do development. I would say 90% of our clients have very robust in-house development teams, and there's a plethora of development agencies out there, that some of which we partner with. I think it's a saturated space, and not one that we wanted to go into because it's not really our expertise. And then to that research piece, it was, yes, early on we got a few research clients and really learned the value of diving into that. And since then have grown a very extensive UX research practice, which feeds really well into the design phase as well.
With that being said, and I know you kind of mentioned earlier, you and Nate working through the process of understanding what your guys' niche was. Okay, we want to bootstrap. We don't want to raise. We want to figure out what we're good at. Where is the target market going to land? Where are we going to be most successful? What role has feedback from customers played in shaping the direction of where you guys are going, especially for the conversations that you and Nate are having behind closed doors? Was it initially high volume outreach, having those conversations, getting feedback from the market, and then coming back and saying, okay, this seems to be where we need to be headed, but this is what we're doing? What role has feedback ultimately played in the success of Fuego?
Yeah, yeah, I think feedback's essential, especially in the field we're in. Like there is no design iteration or evolution of design without user feedback, and we think about our business very much the same way. I think our customers were the ones that were like, "Hey, we want research," right? And we were like, "Okay, like that makes a ton of sense. That's super important. Let's grow this part of our business." And then at the same time, I think you can't just do everything the customer wants, right? It's the same thing with users
Yeah.
and UX, right? Not everything's feasible, not everything is where you want your product or service to go. So I think we often, especially early on, got a lot of requests for like marketing brochures and like sort of like that graphic design kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, we'll do that within SaaS applications that we work on, but we don't want to become a marketing agency. We've both worked at marketing agencies, and that's a component of the stakeholders we work with, but we're way more focused on software design, not like brochures or pamphlets or anything like that. So there are times where you also have to say, hey, thanks for your interest. Thank you so much for reaching out to us, but that's kind of not what we do. We can point you towards some friends that do that.
Right. So when you're getting some of those inbound leads that are asking you guys to do something that you don't necessarily do, where are those inbound leads coming from? Are you guys doing outreach and kind of that's coming from marketing, or how are you having those conversations getting to a point where you're even having to turn customers away? I mean, obviously you have a well-defined ICP.
Yeah.
Where are those inbound leads even coming from?
I think it's just, yeah, it's a combination of outbound. I mean, LinkedIn's great. We have a podcast that's been awesome. We started that from day one. Have met so many awesome people through that. So I definitely love what you're doing here with yours. And then I think pounding the pavement, right? Like we go to so
Of
many
course.
networking events locally. I host the Denver UX meetup. I try and go to a meetup once a month in person. We try and go to an industry conference a few times a year. There are, in this space, you'll hear of like G2 in the SaaS space or Clutch.co in the agency space, and they're kind of like the Yelps for business services. And like sometimes you get leads from those, but you can't really rely on one source. I think diversification of both outbound and inbound is critical. And sales never stops, right? Like it's the way I think about it is 99% of our potential clients or partners probably don't know we exist, right? And maybe we've
Of
moved the
course.
needle in 3 years to maybe it's 98% now. But to me, there's still 98% of stakeholders that I have to shout from the roofs and go shake hands with and have conversations with that don't know we exist and don't know we can help them. So there's an infinite opportunity for outbound, and just getting in front of the right people.
It's all about how you take your product and your consulting services to market. I mean, no one's reinventing the wheel here. Most startups aren't going to be the next Facebook. Most startups aren't going to be the next Tesla. Elon is one of one. Zuckerberg is one of one for a reason, but that doesn't mean that you can't find success in the startup and entrepreneurial space. So you know what, like you said, sales is never stopping. And it's all about how you're taking it to market. How are you interacting with your customers? And what value are you bringing to those initial conversations when we have, customers have the same conversation with 3 companies that all do the exact same thing? Why are they choosing you? And so I think, you hit that right on the nail there in terms of the importance of the outbound selling, networking, going to conferences, just being seen, leaving a Fuego footprint. Because eventually, like you said, it goes 99% of the people don't know who you are. Eventually, 98% of the people don't know who you are, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that 1% can mean, significant difference in your bottom line at the end of the year. So that's a great point as well, Alex.
One thing you just touched on, which was one of my favorite takeaways from business school, was one of the professors was saying, it's an entrepreneur. It was like the #1 program for entrepreneurship, Babson. It's a great program. And one of the professors was challenging a student who's like, I have this new idea. And he's like, why would I invest in that? He basically said, like, I wouldn't think of investing of anything that hasn't been done and proven before. Right. And that's a big thing that I think you touched on with you're not going to be the next Tesla. I think in entrepreneurship, everyone's like, oh, I got to do something new and cool and hot. But like, go see who does it well in your space and like find inspiration from them, right? Like someone's walked this path before and go talk to them.
Absolutely.
Like go talk to those people, hit them up and be like, how'd you do this? We've gotten so much awesome information from just reaching out to the people that we thought would never respond to us, and they really respect us trying to walk that journey as well. So
yeah, Alex, I want to switch gears a bit here and get more into the positive side of building startups. I know we kind of touched on the darker days earlier, kind of a theme here at the Results Loading podcast, understanding the adversity and the mountain climbing, if you will, that co-founders deal with. But want to switch gears, like I said, into a little bit more of the positive element. So for you, and this may sound a little cliche, so feel free to go with this where you'd like. But what does success mean to you away from the books, away from the metrics, away from the milestones? What lets you sleep at night in terms of, I own a business, I am still here after several years? What does the success look like in your head off the revenue, away from the metrics, the milestones and whatnot?
It's a great question, and it's like by far the most important and part of success, right? Like money is, you can make money doing anything and it's not going to make you happy. I think what makes us happy is building a culture that we'd want to work at, right? Like it's really helping our team members grow, our designers grow, listening to our employees and listening to their ideas, and not creating, like, I think we both, Nate and I, had worked at very rigid, tough cultures that were like demeaning and honestly just like not fun to work at. And I just don't think businesses have to be run that way. I think you can really have like an encompassing culture, listening to customers, listening to your team, and also just like I think the coolest part about starting a business with a friend that you get along with is the speed to innovation. Like we'll have an idea and we'll go test it tomorrow, right? And I've seen at other companies where these things take 6 months and committees and panels. And if I look back at all that bureaucracy, none of it makes sense at any level. It's like, wait, like you have an idea, go prove it. Let's test it. Let's move quickly. And I think that makes it a lot more exciting than some of the slower moving places that we've both worked at in the past.
Totally. And I think the speed to innovation point is so important to remember, because taking an idea to market and letting the market respond, it's like, why would you not give it a whirl? Go and have, 100 conversations with customers and see what they think. You can think that you have the best idea in the world, but if the market responds negatively to the idea, then at least and so I think speed to innovation, that aha moment that we often have in, the meeting rooms with our co-founders and partners and whatnot, it's so crucial to be able to go in, apply that idea, and let the market respond. And if it works,
Yeah.
great. And if not, you move on, because that's pretty much our whole world, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more on that one. Alex, one last question for you here, if you don't mind sharing, going back to that aha moment I mentioned prior. Do you have a specific aha moment you remember having, whether it was with Nate or on your own, that was kind of the genesis of what led you to continue to be prosperous and successful within Fuego? Do you have a specific moment that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's a point that I touched on earlier, Michael, and I want to touch on again. And one of the speakers, a leader from VP at Priceline, Ryan, who's been on my podcast, was talking about it as well. I think it's that point when you really get over the fear of failure. I think Jimmy Iovine, who was instrumental in Dr. Dre and NWA coming up, has a good, I know Dre samples it in one of his songs, but he talks about how like if you can get that fear to push you from behind versus standing in front of you. And I think that really clicked for me when I realized like there is no failing. Like of course, like we still could fail, right? Like it's still a slow economy. You never know what's gonna happen. But like I would never see it as a failure. And that did click for me, like maybe like a year into the business, just talking with Nate and realizing that like you really can't fear that. Like and I see a lot of people fearing that day to day in their jobs and in life. And it's like, yo, this is short. And even if you fail, you're gonna go do something else, and it's another opportunity, another door is gonna open. So yeah, I think it's really it really is motivating when you figure out how to flip that to a motivating force versus like a force that's standing in front of you and slowing you down.
You're exactly right. There's an old quote that tennis coaches actually like to use, and it's "Don't be scared to win."
Yeah.
Because this is such a mental game, and
Yeah.
too often the day-to-day and in the startup life can be so tumultuous emotionally, mentally, even physically. And I think that anxiety, that the fear of the unknown and the fear to succeed here in the building space does prevent potentially a lot of co-founders from succeeding, because of that anxiety to actually go, and as opposed to letting it stand in front of you, like you mentioned, putting it behind you and letting that fear force you to be successful and push you forward no matter the consequence. And I think that's such an important mindset to have, especially when you're playing the game that you play. And I think for all the other entrepreneurs or the potential co-founders looking to start a startup listening right now should take from this podcast, if anything, is don't be scared to succeed, because if you let it stand in front of you, you're going to find yourself 3 months down the road completely gassed and burnt out and headed back to the corporate world in no time. So Alex, if there's anything, I appreciate you leaving us with that wisdom today. I think that's fantastic. And again, I couldn't agree more.
For sure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, not really. I mean, thanks so much for having me on. It's awesome to be the inaugural guest, and I'm excited to see where your series goes. And then for anyone interested that's out there listening, check us out, fuegoux.com. If you have any UX research, strategy or design needs. We do a lot of user interviews, user testing, and then a lot of product design for a lot of SaaS clients, also some B2C e-commerce stuff like that. So yeah, feel free to check us out, hit us up, and thanks again, Michael, for having me on.
Alex, thanks so much for coming on and being our first guest. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it.
For sure.
Okay. Take care. Talk to you soon.